fifth grade. Really ain't no difference if that nigga gay.
Blood satellite.
Hey, I'm all for. Okay, I'm gonna really fumble my way through this, but stay with me. I am for more women in movie if movie is about woman not talking.
I'm right there with you, buddy.
I'm becoming an Indian meme. There's another horror movie just to keep this Spooktober Shriektacular running. I saw a movie just the other day, another scary movie. It was Halloween Ends. The final in the trilogy of Halloween movies that started with Halloween. Not to be confused with Halloween or Halloween. This was Halloween.
Are they actually all named the same thing?
Yeah, there's 3 movies at least called Halloween, because there's the original one, then there's the Rob Zombie reboot, and then there was this reboot. And then this reboot was actually good. I liked that first Halloween reboot. I thought it was as good as a Halloween movie like that could be. The second one we talked about on the show is Halloween Kills, was fucking terrible in a lot of ways. This one, Halloween Ends, it might be a great movie. And I wasn't expecting that. And it kind of tricked me at the beginning. I didn't really understand what was going on because it's not even really about Michael Myers. And it ties with the trilogy that's been established. And it's more about the nature of evil and how evil propagates, which was kind of what they were trying to get at with the previous movie. They were trying to get this idea, and they executed it very poorly. But it was this idea that the presence of evil can turn good people into monsters. And in the case of the last movie, that took the form of an evil mob that turned the good people of Haddonfield into a bloodthirsty mob and kills the wrong person. It wasn't a good movie. But this one, it almost has no business being as deep and philosophical as it is. Except for the last little bit. The movie ends really poorly, but there's what it's about. I'm going to walk you through just a little bit. The beginning of the movie, it starts with a character you don't know. Young man. His name escapes me. But he's in a babysitting, and it's setting you up to think that Michael Myers is in the house, babysitting this young boy, and there's whispers. It's Halloween night. Michael Myers could be out there. It's been 5 years ago. Was the last time Michael Myers was seen, but he's still out there. His specter still haunts the small town. They never caught him. He's out there somewhere still. No one knows where. And then, long story short, there's a whole tent scene, but the guy ends up killing the kid by accident. This little boy dies. And then that causes this young man to become a pariah in the town. So the whole beginning of the movie, there's no Michael Myers. A kid dies, but it's not. And you're thinking, like, who is this guy? Is he a young Michael Myers? What's going on? The entire movie is really about this young guy, and it's about the town making him a pariah. He was a young, promising college student. He was about to go off, and he had a pep in his step and a smile on his face, and now he's like this child killer. The town hates him, and there's this line that they haven't seen Michael Myers in forever. But they're so traumatized by these mass killings that hit the town that they're almost looking for a new villain. They need something to there's all this trauma that's looking to be burned off, and there's people who commit suicide every Halloween, and there's people all this shit is going down still after. There's scars on this town. So that's kind of what it's about. It's about the long-term impacts of evil acts on people, and it follows this young guy. And he has a confrontation with Michael Myers, who's living in a sewer, right? And there's this scene that's almost paranormal, where Michael Myers kind of gets him. He's in his mask still. He's living in a sewer. He's an old man, because in this movie he's 70. He's kind of dying and shitty, and he kind of grabs him, and he looks at him. He looks in his eyes, and there's almost this sense that something is transferring into him. So there's a way to look at this from a paranormal or spiritual way, like evil is a spirit that goes into you. But you could interpret this movie without any spiritual stuff whatsoever. Because what it is about is this guy, this whole movie, you're watching him like he was going to go to college, and I just works in a scrapyard with his dad. You know, no one, he gets made fun of. He's bullied. His life is over. He hates this town, and he hates everything about it. And he's just this kind of bitter guy. So there's something to be said that evil acts and the desire to commit evil does get attracted to people who have been traumatized. You know, one example would be pedophiles. Many pedophiles have been abused themselves. That makes them want to do it themselves. And so that is evil. So it's almost this idea that it doesn't need to be like possessed by a demon, even though the movie's kind of portraying it that way. But it's showing that like evil, this Michael Myers kind of transferred his essence into this guy. And then the movie's following this guy over time as he kind of partners up with Michael Myers and starts committing murders himself. He kind of works up to it. But then it's about how evil spreads and finds a home in new generations. And I said, I as I'm watching this, and I wasn't on board with it at the start, I'm like, okay, especially because the last one was so terrible. I'm like, this is just an absolute mess. It's a narrative disaster. But I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, well, the actors are actually very, very good. It's a compelling movie, and I'm like, but what is this? And I just kept thinking of when we were covering that book, Political Ponerology, and many of these books we've covered in the past about the nature of evil and how evil in the book Political Ponerology, people can find that clip up on our Odyssey. It's about how evil, how he defines evil. He defines evil in the book as kind of mental illness and corruption, but it can actually propagate and corrupt an entire system. And by system, I mean groups of individuals. I mean governments. I mean corporations, militaries. If you have these sort of maladaptive, evil people, they can kind of turn people against each other and everything. So, like a virus would. So it's treating this thing called evil like a real virus, now it transfers. And again, I'm just watching this movie. I'm like, this is a very big idea that I did not expect to be attempted. I'd recommend you watch it because I think you'll like it. There's some very gruesome killings in it. It doesn't shy away from that. And a couple of people he kills didn't really deserve it because they're going through this arc where he's like going on a spree. There's sort of like a Bonnie and Clyde, Romeo and Juliet thing there where he starts dating Laurie's granddaughter because she's still in it. You still got to have fucking Jamie Lee Curtis for some fucking reason in this movie. Yeah. So and then she hates the town too. So they both kind of like, let's burn this whole fucking place down and get revenge on these because she's got people who are harassing her, who blame her grandma for like Michael Myers. There's all this stuff going on, all this blame going on. These people who've been like scarred by all this sequence of evil events. And there's this one guy he kills. He kills a black guy who's like a radio DJ. And his only crime was like kind of getting mad at them because they were hanging out on the roof of his radio station. He's like, yeah, man, get out of here, you motherfuckers. I'll beat your ass. He's kind of nice about it. But then he goes back and like smashes his face into the record player and then cuts off his tongue while he's still alive. And I'm like, I see the trend of like you're taking out the bullies. Like that guy was just like, please get off my property. Like he didn't do nothing. This is me saying it. This is seeing a black guy being killed in a film and going that he was one of the good ones. You were kind of being a piece of shit. If I were him, I would have I would have kneeled on your neck. Yeah, if I were him, I would not have killed that black man at that time in that way. Yeah. I would kill Jamie Lee Curtis. I would have instead killed Jamie Lee Curtis. It's like they had this entire movie tied up in a bow, but then they tacked on at the end a thing where her character Laurie like has a final fight with Michael Myers because it's been 40 years. I'm like, well, first of all, you did that in the first movie too. So it's not like a final. You had a final showdown at the start, and it was okay. And then, but you are also 80 years old. You're an 80-year-old woman, and he's like 7 feet tall, and you know lived in a sewer, I assume eating cobwebs. So he can probably beat you up. So the idea that you kicked his ass, I don't buy, but that's what happens at the end. It's so stupid. But it had this like really just in the middle of this poignant movie about the nature of evil and how and what must be done with it. And there's this narrative in the movie about evil doesn't die; it gets reborn. That's kind of what the movie's about. That you can never destroy that energy; it always persists, but just changes its form, which is a very, arguably Christian way of looking at it. Like, can you really kill a demon? No, you can just kill its corporeal form, but you can never, like, you as a human being can't kill a demon. You can't kill evil like that. Anyways, a big philosophical idea. And I liked it because it tied into this book that I had read recently. If you have time, did you want to hear a bit about that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay, so it's really about the nature of evil. And it's told from the perspective of an Eastern Orthodox guy. So the book is called On Resistance to Evil by Force by, and don't get mad at me if I'm bad at pronouncing this, it's part of my charm, Ivan Alexandrovich Ilyin. Ivan Ilyin. This is a pretty famous book. This was written in 1925.
So tonight, to understand what is going on in Ukraine right now, what is going on inside of Russia too, and what's driving Vladimir Putin, we need to talk about a man named Ivan Ilyin. He's important to all of this. Ivan Ilyin, born in 1883 in Russia to an aristocratic family, a graduate of law, who opposed the Bolshevik Revolution and soon became a right-wing anti-communist philosopher. Ilyin was exiled from the Soviet Union on the orders of Lenin himself in 1922. He went to Germany, where his mother was from, and soon became a fan of Mussolini, who had come to power in Italy that same year that Ilyin was exiled. It wasn't just Mussolini, though. He also quickly became an apologist for Hitler. In 1933, Ilyin backed the Nazi takeover of Germany, writing an article headlined "National Socialism, a New Spirit." Russian elites have been turning to Ivan Ilyin, the Nazi apologist, in increasing numbers.
And this guy, he was an Eastern Orthodox guy, and he wrote this book about the nature of the necessity of resisting evil by force, which is the title, which is what I said. I'm going to shut up. It was in response largely to Tolstoy. So Tolstoy at the time, according to this book, now I'm not a Tolstoy scholar or an expert, but Tolstoy was also a Christian. And Tolstoy, according to Mr. Ilyin, was saying that he was promoting a type of Christianity that was a bit too submissive, a bit too passive, too pacifist. And it was this idea, Tolstoy, and I don't have any Tolstoy quotes in front of me, so I'll see if I can find some by the time I air this. But it was more like, if you employ violence, if you employ force, if you employ subversion or try to coerce people into doing what you want, that is tantamount to evil. That evil behaves a certain way. That if you were a true Christian, a true God-fearing man, you would never use force on another person for any reason whatsoever, which is something you hear in the modern day as well. You hear a lot of modern people say that, especially atheists who want to be like, Christ would rather you die than, stand up for yourself, which is kind of a silly way of looking at it. But he lays out an argument that evil exists, and he defines evil in a specific way, and that it is your duty to resist evil even by force. And that if you don't resist evil in any way you can by force, it will propagate. And you don't win points by ignoring it. You don't win points by letting it run rampage over the world. And that his argument was God will not look kindly on you if you just permit evil to exist because you're afraid of picking up a sword to defeat it. So he defines, now some people might not agree completely with how he defines evil, but that's what I found so interesting about this book, that he took the steps to really quantify what evil is, because some people use the word all the time, but they don't know what it means. And that's what leads to books like Political Ponerology, saying that evil is just tantamount to mental illness. It's corrupt, vague corruption, it's badness, but it's like, no, what is evil? It's not just violence, it's like intent, it's malice. But what do you mean? Can you do something intentionally that is intentionally violent but also not evil? That's kind of the questions that we're dealing with here. And so he would say yes. So he says that, now, if we disagree with this, but this is what he says. He says, evil occurs when people lack love and spiritualization, since evil is internal. Good is spiritualized love. Evil is anti-spiritual hostility. So I don't want to get into like a whole ontological thing about like what is spirituality, but let's just say that is how he defines it, that love has to be coupled with spirituality, and it has to have sort of like a driving force. It can't just be affection. It can't just be this sort of passive, I love everyone, which means I don't want to do anything ever. And he says, if you do not resist evil, you accept it, and it eventually dominates you. Now, he defines evil with 4 qualities, and I like these. And if people disagree with it, that's fine. But I like playing around with these 4. He says, evil has 4 properties: unity, aggressiveness, deviousness, and manifoldness. So that means that it not only has intent, evil tends to recognize other evil and will work with it a lot of the time. And it's got to be subversive. It's not just lashing out. It's not just a crazy person. It is sort of like, in a Machiavellian sense, the ability to plan ahead and try and do something wicked. And also manifoldness, meaning that it grows, meaning that it multiplies, that it's not just a crazy person who kind of sometimes does a bad thing. It's something that it functions like a virus. So that is what is evil, and that is what separates evil from anything else that might just be deemed antisocial behavior. Now, there might be other definitions we can tack on top of that, and I'm willing to have that conversation, but I think as a starting point, that's as good as anything I had heard, because for your average person, they would agree that evil exists. We spent the entire episode talking about it. Earlier in the episode, we were talking about Facebook moderators finding groups where they're selling their own children selling their children to grown-ups who want them to have sex with animals on camera for money. There's nothing you can call that except evil, right? And so, and I would argue it fits all of these 4 qualities, that if left unchecked, if you don't stop these people, they will just propagate forever, right? So, okay, let's start with that. He makes an interesting claim. He goes deep in the book, from in almost an irrational sense of trying to push back against Tolstoy, push back against this passive good. And he says that the people who are like that are actually selfish. He says they're moralists. He says a moralist is more concerned with themselves and avoiding wrong deeds than they are with injecting goodness into the world. So that's what he would say. He would say love, spirituality, is positivistic. It is something that seeks to spread good in the world. It is not passive. It's not a wallflower. And so a moralist is someone who almost just wants to actually things. You know what I mean? And it's arguably narcissistic that they're so obsessed with themselves that they don't even consider other people or how the entire system works or how good can spread. So they're the ones who preach non-resistance and pacifism. And he says morality itself is not about good or evil, but morality as a social construct is just about personal kindness and personal depravity. So morality is almost like a technique. Morality is like a legalistic thing, but it's not a higher order thing that defines a society or defines how people should really relate to each other. It's more of just like, covering your mouth and you sneeze, in a sense. Like it doesn't really matter. And he says, as a result, the love of a pacifist moralist is closer to something like hedonism. And so he blames Tolstoy for basically making Russians less religious and fake Christians. Now, there's a lot of people who love Tolstoy. I've got nothing against Tolstoy. But I don't know the history of this, but he gives enough examples in the book where I think that is true. And because he claims that Tolstoy denounces all inducement and coercion as violence, which should never be used to combat evil. And this will sound very familiar to people these days who hear, weekly or monthly that, words are violence, that, bad thoughts are violence, certain comment, dead naming is violence. Now, this isn't a new idea. This has been bandied around forever, that, to try and even convince someone of something is violence, because you're being hostile, you're being aggressive, you're trying to go against their will, do something they don't have consent to do, or they've never given you their consent to do, rather. Now, he makes the claim that I think a lot of people know deep down that, well, that doesn't make sense, because all society is coercion. Every day we're coercing people to do things in some way or another. There's always some level of soft coercion going on. So coercion, in that sense, is impossible to avoid. So that doesn't make any sense. And so, like, anytime you have an argument, that's like, you're going to say that's like mental violent coercion. No, that doesn't make any sense. And he says, like, even in our society, violence and harm are permitted as long as it's done for a good cause, since good or evil is internal and nothing external is inherently good or evil. So what he's saying is, we permit like pain in society. That's exercise. Exercise is pain. We permit prison. There's lots of ways in society to use force, physical force, for the better good of something, like restraining them from hurting themselves. That's a big one. But he's making the claim that nothing external can be good or evil. Oh, because good or evil only happens within you. It can, so like, if something is good plus an action, that action is good. But if something is evil plus that action, it's evil. So like, the idea is that you could fight someone on the side of good and it's not evil. But if you fight someone and you're evil and you're just trying to hurt them, that is evil. But that does not make fighting itself good or evil, in the sense that, like cutting someone's body, that's the difference between murder and surgery. The act of cutting a body is neither good nor bad. So he uses this to mount a defense of violence, essentially.
Yeah.
And he gives the example of, like, okay, let's say in the eyes of God, you are in a position, just a thought experiment, you're in the position where someone is has a gun to an innocent woman's head, some guy, and she's crying for her life, and he's going to shoot her in the head. You have the ability to stop him because you also have a gun. Do you shoot that guy, or do you let him shoot her? Now, he says what the Tolstoys of the world would do, in his words. What they would do is they would sacrifice themselves. Like, I would never kill you. I would never even hurt you, but take my life instead as a grand sacrifice for hers. Well, his claim is like, well, what he'll do is he'll shoot you and then shoot her. And in the eyes of God, that sacrifice, that needless sacrifice, doesn't make you good. That is arguably virtue signaling, because your action didn't prevent an evil deed from happening. It would arguably be more good for you to shoot that guy in the head and take a life. And he's making the argument like, you are stopping evil. You're stopping the propagation of evil acts that could also have reverberations throughout society. And here's a good example of two acts of shooting. Two acts of pulling a trigger and a bullet leaves a gun, but they have two different intents that come from two different places, and so the act of shooting that gun is neither good nor bad. But and in this sense, you can use violence in the name of good, and this is a good argument against a lot of modern people who think that evil only lives in actions and evil only lives in techniques, which we always kind of instinctually know is wrong, because we can list 1,000 different ways where, like I said, doing harm to someone might actually save their lives. To save someone from a drug overdose, you kind of have to stab them in the heart with a needle. But
or imprison them if they're an addict, or like so you might have to amputate someone's leg to save them from blood loss, like or from infection. Like, there's all kinds of things that are, without context, could be interpreted as either good or evil. So it is pretty easy to separate the morality from the action. And I feel like, for me, I'm pounding F right now. Like, I think my morality already is lined up like this. I think probably a lot of people, their morality already lines up like that.
Yeah.
So.
And the reason I like this book is because a lot of people deep down might hear feel that this is correct without even having to say it, but reading it written down like this and having a very serious defense written for it, that's why I liked it, because he does put it in ways that I never considered before, where I felt like, oh, maybe I think that just because I'm crazy, because I'm a kooky Canadian. But no, he's mounting a very solid spiritual and political defense of it. And he says that and I just liked the scorn he takes with someone like the pacifist, because he said it's actually false righteousness to sacrifice your life for another and to die with them. That is only love insofar as selfish moral righteousness has no loving connection to another soul. Because that's kind of what he's talking about deep down from a spiritual perspective. Like, if you have a connection to that soul, you just wouldn't want to die with them. You actually don't really want to save them, do you? Because if you wanted to save them truly, you would take a drastic action, and you must live in the universe where drastic actions are necessary. And I think you can take this and paint this over a lot of different, geopolitical, intrapolitical events, whatever, but just realizing that desperate times sometimes call for desperate measures, and that in his claim would be that God would not look on you any differently if you stopped a rape by shooting the rapist in the head, or beat that rapist's brains in. Like, you will not score points with God if you swap in your asshole with that person. You know what I mean? Like, like God will just be very confused at you. Jesus Christ will say, that is the last thing I wanted to happen. The last thing I wanted to happen was have 2 rapes. You just made a very happy rapist. That's not what you're supposed to do. The thing you're not supposed to do is make a guy who loves killing happy that he got a free murder out of it.
Oh, man.
Yeah, and once you phrase it like that, you're like, duh. Fucking duh. Yeah, like, I never heard a phrase like that before.
Yeah, you're not stopping evil, you're just discounting it. What are you doing? Stop.
And he kind of he goes deep into the details about how this can be done, because he does also make reservations. He said, like, look, if you are trying to drive out evil, if you have an evil person, like, you need to use force. Not always, like, we use killing in the extreme here, but it would also be like imprisoning them. It would also be restraining them, like using force in other ways. And there's graduating levels of force, of course. And he says that, the person who is dealing with this person also needs to be full of that spiritual love, because he also says, like, look, when you're dealing with evil, you can't use any methods or punishments that break their spirit. So he's anti-torture. He's anti anything that intentionally tries to break the mind or the spirit of the evil person, because he says, well, that is just evil. Like, just trying to inflict pain for the sake of pain, there is no good justification for that. And it does cross over into, like, the type of force you are doing can't just be for the sake of it. You know what I mean? So he goes into great detail about, like, just physical torture, because you cannot coerce anyone to do anything with torture. Like, if you're trying to coerce the evil out of someone, we're giving extreme examples like a rapist or a murderer, but let's say they're just a corrupted person who's kind of being wicked in a way. You can use force to try and drive the evil out of them. Like, maybe that's psychology, maybe that's some kind of therapy, maybe that's just like yelling at them and making, whatever it is. It's like dealing with a junkie. Like, how would you deal with a junkie? You confront them, you yell at them, then you lock them up and you force them to do a bunch of shit. It's probably going to be painful, but that's the topic. But he's like, within that framework, you actually can't beat a junkie sober. So he's like, not only is it impractical to use too much force, it is evil in itself. So he's like, if you're going to deal with this, you need to not employ evil people to fix evil people, which probably is what happens in the prison system. I'm not a huge proponent of prison reform, but every time I hear these stories about these, like, sadistic assholes who get jobs in, like, meat processing plants, I'm like, yeah, there's probably sadistic assholes who get into, like, prison guard shit. And, like, they're the last people you want doing this, because they just amplify the presence of evil. And he's got, like, a bunch of Bible quotes in here that actually justify killing. Like, I won't go into all of them, but he's got a few here, like John 3:13.
So
There's a document put out by the Russian Orthodox bishops called Basis of the Social Concept, that is in English, available for free online. I recommend everyone read. That goes through the understandings of war and peace and nationality and fighting and all that stuff, at least from the Russian Orthodox perspective. So on an individual level, like if I'm being persecuted for my faith, if someone punches me because I'm a Christian, I'm called to not hit them back and turn the other cheek. Absolutely. That's not the same thing as defending your family, defending the church, or defending your country. I want to say it was St. Philaret of Moscow had a pretty based quote where he said, I'm going to butcher it, but it was all about fighting for your fatherland, defending your country, stuff like that. So I wouldn't call it pacifism because, first of all, it takes more effort to not strike back than it does to strike back. At least if you're a man worthy of the name, your instinct is to hit the guy back. So it takes a lot more restraint and willpower to actually not do that. Or if you're in a really grace-filled mood, to bless the guy that punched you. But that's not the same as defending other people. You know, in the Bible, it also says those who do not take care of their own are worse than infidels. So, and Christ also says if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. So there's a big difference between defending yourself for a Christian reason and defending others, especially defense of the helpless and the innocent.
It's allowed in the Bible. You're allowed to pick up your swords against evil. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say on that topic, because it relates to, I think, a lot of the topics we touched on in this episode. And I think it's the takeaway for people could be that we use the word evil to mean a lot of different things. Some people just mean mental illnesses, but I like people who take efforts to quantify it in spiritual and non-spiritual terms. But even in non-spiritual terms, it seems to take on the air of a spirituality, because you're talking about very lived experiences that can't be explained just with, they're not taking the right pills. And I think that's what your average liberal runs up against. It's like, well, we have to scientifically fix this. Well, maybe you can't scientifically fix some of these people, and the only thing that's left is removal by force. And I guess that's all. Did you have any thoughts on that before we get going?
Well, I think I'd like, oh man, what was it? Some book, or when we were talking about the idea of defeating something by not just destroying it, but making its death into a ritual. And I think that if you can separate the action from the morality, then there are other actions that I think even he could describe as evil that maybe are not evil. Like if for example, executing, right? If you're going to execute someone through public hanging, which is arguably more torturous than the electric chair, why did you choose that? Why did you make the decision to do something that's actually more torturous? Well, there's a reason for it, and it's actually to prevent future evil, because having a society where people are executed in such a public way prevents other evil from happening. There's actually a practical reason to do this, and it is to prevent evil, and it does work. And so, I mean, where do you draw the line then? Drawing and quartering?
Yeah.
Or like whatever else. Like, do you turn him into a Cenobite and hang him upside down by his lungs? Like, you could do all of these things. I'm not saying you should do them, but I mean, the jury's out on which of the, I think if you could prove that they were, I mean, it's not like it's a proof thing, because we're talking about morality. But I mean, the morality of it would be, if you are convinced that this is actually a way that will stop future evil, then I guess.
Yeah, I'm just going to summarize it in this part of the book near the end here, just to put a cap on it. He says, the answer obtained by us sounds incontrovertible and definite. Physical suppression and compulsion can be a direct religious and patriotic duty of man, and when this is the case, he has no right to evade it. The fulfillment of this duty will lead him as a participant in the great historical battle between the servants of God and the forces of hell, and in this battle he will not only have to draw his sword, but also take upon himself the burden of killing his fellow man. And he does, over the course of the book, explain like what spiritual love is. I didn't get that into much, but it's not like, he says, spiritual love isn't just like, it isn't just admiration, because that is fleeting. He says that, the compassionate moralist, in dealing in these kind of airy-fairy terms, they infect society with nihilism of the state and law. So that's why he's saying, like, this sentimentality isn't just inert. It isn't just, purposeless. It actually makes the society more nihilistic and weaker, and not only allowed, and that through that nihilism, evil is allowed to propagate, which some people would say that is what's happening now. So for him, the stakes are very, very real, that without action, without restraint and physical suppression, and dealing with extreme circumstances with extreme measures with the intent of just not trying to be like, he makes a claim here, and we can end on this. He said that man is not inherently righteous. So appealing to perfection by allowing evil doesn't make you righteous, right? By saying, like, I must behave perfectly. Well, human beings aren't capable of behaving perfectly. Human beings are imperfect. That's the whole fucking point. That's kind of the message of Christianity. So he's saying, don't worry about behaving like Christ. Don't start thinking that you can act like the Son of God. Start with that. Let's start with the fact that you're not fucking Jesus. So you're not, just work. He says, you don't start from above with perfection. You start from below with need. So he says, and these people who are just walking around acting like, what would Jesus do? You don't need to worry about what really Jesus would do. What you need to worry about is start with just stopping evil, and we'll go from there.
Yeah.
Do not let the rapists win. Listen and love Blood Satellite.